guys, so I am recovering from being sick, so I'm gonna sound like this the whole video, and I know people probably hate when YouTubers talk about, oh, I've been sick, but I saw comments on another person's video and they were like, why didn't you say anything about why do you sound so nasally and stuff like that. I also can't hear anything, so I don't know how loud I'm really talking to you guys. I guess I'll figure out in editing. Doesn't help that I'm wearing a beanie. So we are back from my break. Thank you guys so much for being patient with me and letting me take that break. I just really needed a breather after Vlogmas. If you didn't see my Vlogmas videos, check it out. It was fun times, not really. A lot of boring times, but you know, you can check it out anyway to see what I did with my life for a whole month. And then after graduating, I just really wanted to take a breather and also just take a breather from this specific video, which is why it's so late, even though I promised it so long ago. But that is right, we were talking about personality disorders today because it is one of the most fascinating disorders to me because it's rooted in personalities and a lot of it has a genetic basis, and so it's really difficult to treat, and oftentimes people refuse treatment or just don't continue with their treatment. They refuse therapy or don't go to therapy, and they don't take their medication because they don't think anything's wrong with them, which is why it's so interesting to me. So before we get into the actual disorders and everything, I just have to put out this disclaimer that it is not uncommon to identify with any of these traits or any of these disorders. A lot of people do this, especially in abnormal psychology. We're told from the get-go, do not self-diagnose based on this class because it is normal to be like, oh, I have that. So that is not the purpose of this video. We are talking about them generally, giving brief, summaries of what these disorders are and why they're so fascinating. I don't want you guys to see this as a diagnosis video of like, to self-diagnose yourself, because that's not the purpose of this video. If you do feel like something is genuinely wrong with you and you may or may not have one of these disorders, please reach out to a professional and get some help, or a friend or a family member or just someone that you trust to get some help. So as I said, these disorders are rather interesting to me because in order to be diagnosed, they have to cause distress usually to the person who is experiencing them, at least based on the DSM-5. However, a lot of times they don't see anything wrong with themselves because their thought process and their behavior, they often blame on others, or they'll find reasons to put it on other people, like, well, it's because of them that I'm acting this way kind of thing, so they don't actually see anything wrong with themselves. And actually about 10% of the population has a personality disorder, and that kind of ranges. It's based on studies, and so we don't actually have like a clear number, but around 10%. And there are 4 key symptoms when it comes to personality disorders in order to be diagnosed, and that is distorted thinking, interpersonal problems, which is probably the biggest example or biggest symptom, I guess, of personality disorders. They often have a really hard time maintaining friendships and relationships. Problematic emotional response and over under regulated impulse control. So there are actually 10 personality disorders, and there are 3 clusters of them to kind of organize them. And cluster A is the odd or eccentric personality disorders, which include paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal. Then we have cluster B, which is the dramatic, emotional, erratic personality disorders, which to me are the most interesting and most fascinating. So cluster B is definitely the most interesting in my opinion, and that includes antisocial personality disorder, histrionic, narcissistic, and borderline personality disorder, which those are also the most common out of all of the personality disorders. And then we have cluster C, which is the anxious or fearful personality disorders, which include avoidant, dependent, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, which is different than OCD, which, we'll kind of get into that. Now, before we get started, I'm going to say it's very common for people to have comorbidity with other disorders, and also especially other personality disorders within that cluster. So some of these disorders might sound like other things as well, but through therapy and, talking to the person, they rule out certain things. So it might sound like schizophrenia, but they'll typically try to diagnose that last because that is, really hard to treat. And not only that, but the treatment for that is very intense for the person who is going through it. So basically the basis of paranoid personality disorder is that everyone is out to harm them, take advantage of them, or humiliate them. So they're very suspicious of others, and they typically don't trust others and don't have very strong relationships at all. They often suffer from pathological jealousy, just constantly being jealous of others. They hold grudges like to the death, and also they don't confide in others, which is why, interpersonal issues are the biggest symptom, as I mentioned, of personality disorders, because Each of these things has to do with other people typically, and not trusting other people, or black and white thinking, which we'll get into when we get into the emotional cluster B personality disorders. So the most rare personality disorder is the schizoid personality disorder, which they're basically very monotonous, very cold. They come across as like aloof, and they seek out kind of repetitive or just monotonous activities, like very mechanical activities that have very low human interaction. They don't really follow social cues, so they don't really reciprocate like facial expressions or hand gestures. You know, they don't nod when they're talking to you, so their emotional expression is super low, which is why they come across as very dull or bland or even boring. They're considered kind of loners, which is kind of rude, but you know, that's kind of what they are because they just isolate themselves from everybody. Then we have schizotypal, which is very similar to schizoid, but they often see things, like they'll be more likely to hallucinate, like such as shadows in the corner of their eyes that's not there, or they'll see flashing lights that other people can't see. So they have cognitive and perceptual distortions as well, on top of the inability to, you know, show a lot of emotional expression. So they're also very isolated. They usually have odd beliefs that they can read other people's thoughts, or that their thoughts have been stolen, and this disorder is typically more likely to be diagnosed if someone in the family has been diagnosed with schizophrenia. So those are the brief summaries of cluster A personality disorders. Now we're going to get on to cluster B, which is the most fascinating in my opinion, and I kind of have the most notes taken on this one because they're just really interesting to me. So of course we have antisocial, which we all kind of know what this is. You know, a lot of serial killers get diagnosed with this because they just have no remorse and they have no idea or like respect for others' human basic rights. They can come across as hostile, aggressive, and manipulative, and oftentimes the symptoms are shown earlier in childhood, which there's kind of an evolution of this disorder. Usually if they're under around like 7, they'll be diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder first, and then if untreated that can develop into conduct disorder, which is diagnosed in adolescence, and then if you're over 18 you'll be diagnosed with antisocial, but they're all kind of the same thing. Another fun fact about personality disorders is you can't be diagnosed with a personality disorder in adolescence. You have to kind of be over 18, not kind of, you have to be over 18 to be diagnosed with it, especially antisocial. That's not something that they'll give to an adolescent because you have to separate it from regular teen behavior. And then conduct disorder can be treated and fixed in adolescence, so they won't develop into antisocial. But if untreated, it can develop into antisocial, and then we get the hostile, kind of manipulative, aggressive adults. This is one of those personality disorders that they blame others for their behavior. So they'll completely manipulate the situation. They're very smooth in that way, where they're, you know, charming, they can manipulate anybody, and they have no remorse for their actions at all. I actually did a whole it was presentation, PowerPoint, whatever, essay on conduct disorder because I did the child and family psychopathology, and I wanted to do something that was interesting, that was really difficult, because dealing with this kind of disorder in kids is so hard. That I have firsthand experience, but just by studying it and learning more about it, it was really interesting. And if you want to watch some movies that exhibit this, we need to talk about Kevin. That's a good one. And also The Good Son. The Good Son is the one that we did the report on. It was a group thing. And that movie is so good and so sad. Like, it's really intense. So definitely watch those two if you want a better idea of conduct disorder, which could lead into antisocial. So then we got histrionic. Not a lot of people talk about this one, but it's the people who suffer from this are extremely attention seeking. They will exaggerate their emotions to the extreme. It's often really embarrassing for the people that are around them, like their friends and family, because they are just like over the top. They feel the need to be the center of attention, and they feel very uncomfortable and often depressed if they're not the center of attention. So they will do anything to get that attention, anything. And often when they fake these emotions, they're very vague and kind of like shallow emotions. When like asked about it, like, well, what are you feeling? It's kind of just like, I'm really sad. And so that can then make them come across as disingenuous and that they're not actually being honest. Another common one that we all kind of know about is narcissistic personality disorder. And I think, okay, one thing that I have to nitpick about society in general, we throw around these terms a lot, like, oh, I'm so antisocial, you're such a narcissist, or people just throwing out those words, you know, and it's kind of the same to me as saying, oh, you're so bipolar, or I'm so depressed, when you're not. So, or they don't know the actual definition. So hopefully this video can kind of help educate in that manner and like, you know, explain what the personality disorders actually are and that you're not really narcissistic or you're not really antisocial. So with this one, it's not just you're obsessed with your looks or you're obsessed with yourself. I mean, that's kind of the basis of what it is, but they have more of a sense of entitlement. They feel like they have to have special treatment. They actually feel devastated when they realize that they have just normal human abilities, and they often fantasize and daydream about their, you know, about success or power and their amazing looks or their high intelligence, so much so that they actually get lost in that and they don't actually make any moves to achieve those goals that they're dreaming so much of. What's even more interesting about narcissistic personality disorder is that at the root of themselves, they actually have really low self-esteem and they need others to constantly bolster their ego, basically. So they need other people to constantly validate them. That's why they need that special treatment, because deep down they are just really low self-esteem and they don't want to realize and face the music that they are in fact just a normal human being. Next, we're going to talk about borderline personality disorder. Now, this is the most researched and probably the most common of the personality disorders. And they basically see the world in black and white, which makes it really, really hard for them to kind of understand others and their way of thinking or what they say. So they see the world as very simplified, all or nothing. So it's either this or that, which is why they come across as, you know, inconsistent, because they will flip-flop between one way or the other. And it's often very much extreme thought process. Like they go from this way to this way, and it's just, you know, constantly going through the extremes instead of like the gray area. They often change their relationships very frequently. They will change careers at the drop of a hat with no notice to anybody else. It'll just come out of left field for a lot of people. And because they have the inability to regulate their emotional thinking, they will often participate in self-destructive behavior such as cutting or eating disorders or things like that, or, you know, risky behavior, having sex with random strangers. And this is the one where relationships are the most affected, because say someone, I saw this example online which I thought was really interesting. Say someone forgets an anniversary and the other partner jumps to conclusions and says, well, he forgot the anniversary, therefore he does not love me. So they will jump to those conclusions without even talking to the other person, and then they'll think, well, he must be cheating, he wants to leave me, and then they'll go to that person and say, please don't leave me, and the other person will be confused, like, what are you talking about? I only forgot our anniversary, I'm sorry. So it's kind of that black and white thinking that causes the destruction of their relationships and friendships. As I was looking for examples of celebrities with personality disorders, there weren't that many, and actually I found a bunch of articles listing all these celebrities that have borderline personality disorder, and I was like, okay, so I was reading through it and all they were was speculation, and that kind of bothered me. There was maybe one or two lesser known people, like there's an NFL player who has borderline, and then a comedian, I believe, that were kind of like lesser known, but they were saying people like Angelina Jolie has borderline, which I don't know if she actually was diagnosed back in the day, because she did seek out mental health treatment. People like Amy Winehouse, Lindsay Lohan, Amanda Bynes, people were just saying that they have borderline, but it's all speculation. They're actually diagnosing them when they have never had a formal diagnosis of this, so don't believe everything you read online. Now we're going to talk about cluster C personality disorders, starting with avoidant personality disorders. So this person avoids social interaction like completely. They're deathly afraid that they're going to be criticized or rejected by others. They believe that they're so unappealing and so not good enough that they'll just completely shut everybody out in order to not be rejected by them. So they completely avoid social interactions, and it causes them a deep anxiety when they're in social situations, which this is not the same as social anxiety. I think the personality disorder is a little bit more extreme than something like social anxiety. Next one is dependent personality disorder. This person, as you know, the title would say, they very much depend on others. They have to be taken care of by other people, and so much so that they will tend to not stand up for themselves, and they don't want to say the wrong thing for fear that they're gonna push the other person away or push, you know, their friends and family away, and so they don't fight back and they don't want to risk losing that relationship. A lot of times these people are taken advantage of, or they're victims of abuse because they just won't stand up for themselves. They'll do anything to keep that person around. Then we have obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Again, can be a little bit more serious than OCD. I believe this has another name for it as well. but basically they have to follow orderliness, certain rules and regulations, and they feel very uncomfortable when something goes astray from their, normal routine. They're often seen as very rigid or inflexible, and of course seen as controlling because they really can't delegate other people to do certain work because they just want to do it themselves to make sure it's done right, and they are physically incapable of doing a subpar job on something. So you're probably thinking you have all of these disorders. I know, me too. But I want you to remember that these are very serious personality disorders, and you have to get a formal diagnosis from a professional in order to say that you have one of these things. So please do not self-diagnose from this video, but I do hope this was, somewhat, educational, I guess, and somewhat interesting for you guys to hear about the personality disorders, all 10 of them. In abnormal psych, these are some of my favorite to study. I think they're fascinating. If you want me to do a video on like mood disorders such as anxiety, depression, things like that, kind of in the style of this video, we could do more videos such as this. I don't think there's any real harm in it. I'm not diagnosing anybody, and hopefully you're not diagnosing yourself. So leave some video requests down below, especially psych topics that you'd like me to cover. I love talking about it, of course, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.